Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for all joining today. We are here today with a special speaker. I'm Avinash Thawani from Mumbai March. So, let me tell you a brief introduction about Mumbai March and why we're here also. First thing to start off, we're celebrating the 75th Amrit Mahotsav as this is 75th year of independence, and happy Independence Day to all of you. Let me tell you a bit about Mumbai March. So Mumbai March is a people's movement. It started about 11 years ago, and it's working steadily towards making Mumbai a dream for a dream city. As we know, Mumbai is the financial capital of India, and we hope that soon in Olympic ready city. So we have four campaigns with us, which we started off with River March. So River March is to strive rejuvenation of four dying rivers of Mumbai and to get back its flora and fauna. And we have been successful in launching the rejuvenation. So last year, finally, the tenders for the two rivers of Mumbai and 2002 crores have been approved, and the Bhumi Pujan has been done. Now, our second project is Road March. Road March is to strive congestion-free roads in Mumbai and to connect all the missing links. Hashtag Lapata Sarak. We study the Mumbai DP plan and we make suggestions to the government. In that, we have been successful by telling the government by the octroi nakas which were there to transform into integrated bus terminals, which will reduce the traffic in Mumbai city greatly as 4,000 buses come into the city and they will now come into the various octroi nakas such as Daisar and Vashi. And our next project, which we're here today, is about 0Slums Mumbai. So as we know, Mumbai, 65% of Mumbai is in slums. People stay in slums, and they are the heart of our city. If you see the taxi drivers, the auto rickshaws, the waiters, even the hotel staff, everyone, even the maids at our home, everyone stays there, even the constable. So we assure that we hope that Mumbai becomes slum free. We are working towards that. And today we have a special speaker to understand the slum upgradation of various other cities in the world which has happened. And so let me introduce him. But before that, we are here today with Hire College of Architecture. So we are been in a 8-week lectures on with them in collaboration to get understand the Zero Slums Mumbai project and to come with a proposal for the government. So we're very thankful to them, Hire College of Architecture, the principal and the professors and Sonali madam for giving their time and really believing in this project. So let me introduce you to our speaker today. His name is Mr. Claudio. He's an architect and urban planner. He is a development practitioner with nearly 40 years of experience in more than 30 different countries and is a practicing expert. He's also been a short-term consultant to governments, bilateral and multilateral organizations, academic institutions, civil society organizations, and community-based organizations. Claudio specialized in housing and slum upgradation. Throughout the years, he's worked intensively the nexus housing and land policies, city development strategies, combining it with capacity building program development and policy implementation. Claudio has published widely on various thematic areas on housing and urban development. He is an author of the UN Habitat practical guide for conducting housing profile and UN Habitat strategy on street-led citywide slum upgradation. He is also the co-author of Brazilia's first housing policy document in 1980s. He is an experienced facilitator and moderator. And he's also worked with, he's a consultant to the World Bank, United Nations Development Program, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, coordinate UN Habitat, bilateral organized countries such as Armenia, Bolivia, Brazil, Bulgaria, Cuba, Egypt, Kenya, and many more. So let me get him on the screen and let's hear what he has for us today.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And on interest of time, I will spare you from any additional information about myself. I think that our colleagues from Mumbai March have given you quite a large spectrum of my professional life. So I'll go straight to my presentation. Throughout the presentation, I will give you some, let's say, some background information where it comes from and what kind of involvement I have had with these programs. So here it is. Let me just put this. So the presentation will go about the practice of slum upgrading from a global perspective, in the sense of looking what different countries and cities have done to respond to this phenomenon of informal urbanization and the appearance, persistence, and multiplication of slums in our cities. So the presentation is quite a large presentation, but I will focus on few aspects of that, looking at the global affordability crisis, which I argue is one of the fundamental deep-rooted causes of informal housing and informal urbanization and the formation of slums in cities. I'll look into the policy responses that we know from different places in the world, different regions, countries, and we can design a certain retrospective how we have been responding to the appearance of slums in cities, the logic of interventions in the different settlements, and what we learn from experience. So I will focus on this retrospective of policy responses, and in all the experience and cases I have, I will only focus on 3 cases: Rio de Janeiro, the street-led slum upgrading strategy of UN Habitat, and the experience of Addis Ababa, which I find it relevant from the types of experience that are emerging in Mumbai. Now, the global affordability crisis, what is it? Well, before the pandemics, based on the evidence we had, we can argue that the lack of affordable housing options compel people with low and moderate incomes to resort to informal housing solutions, which propels informal urbanization and slum formation. Now, if we look at housing affordability as a relation between income and price, which gives you an indication of the house price to income ratio, and looking at the access to housing via ownership and access of housing via the rental market, if we look at the house price to income ratio 3, which means that housing prices is equivalent to 3 times the annual household income. This would be considered as the threshold of affordability in a particular market or in a particular city. And if the access through the rental housing, we consider as 25% as the commitment of household income to rental prices in a particular housing market. This would be considered as the level of affordability. And when we look at the global sample of cities, of 200 cities, that UN Habitat developed with the New York University and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I was responsible for drafting with colleagues from the university the chapter on housing. So these are the cities that we looked to define a global universe of urban universe of cities that would represent the global urbanization environment. So the findings is very, very similar to the McKinsey Global Institute blueprint to address global affordable housing for 2018. The Demographia survey of 2019 and also 2020 and 21, and the yearbook of housing finance in Africa, developed by the Center of Affordable Housing Finance. What did we find? The home ownership is not affordable. In all the 200 cities, consistent with all these surveys, that house price to income ratio are far above 3. So people are compromising other, let's say, needs and basic needs in order to be able to live in these cities. Otherwise, they have to opt to go informally to different types of housing solutions. Rental housing is also not affordable. So if you cannot afford to buy and if you cannot afford to rent, where do you live as a family? Now, we found in a particular city that 58% of household income is committed to rent. So how are you going to live if you have to pay more than half of your household income to live in a place? And in other cities, we saw that house price to income ratio are more than 20. So which means a household would have to save the equivalent of 20 times his or her household income in order to afford to purchase a housing unit in that market. So it's quite obvious that the only options in these situations is to go informal. Now, the housing sector in these cities are very restricted, with very little options for those who have low income or moderate income. And we see these distortions reflected in the spatial structure of cities, which means informal housing massively developing, slums, overcrowding, sub-rent of existing housing, high land price, and sprawling toward the periphery where land prices are cheap and people are occupying these lands in different ways. So this is a map of Africa where you can see in brown just a tiny percentage of people can afford the cheapest newly built house in these countries. So if you live in a city in some of these countries, you cannot afford. So you go informal, obviously. So my argument is that the housing affordability crisis has a climate impact, but has an impact on social and spatial inequality in cities. It generates a physical and spatial manifestation, so that in the persistence and multiplication of slums, a very dynamic informal land and housing markets, and a geography of inequality and segregation, which brings social and spatial exclusion in cities, which are the cities of exclusion, as I call it, which manifested as slum formation becoming the predominant form of city growth in many parts of the world. As you can see, in sub-Saharan Africa and some parts of Asia is nearly a synonym of urbanization, the slum formation, which 4.6 to 4.5 slum formation, and Southern Asian 2.9 urban growth and 2.2 slum formation rates. So this is a data from UN Habitat research. But how do we measure slum? So when we talk about slum, the internationally accepted definition that member states in the United Nations have accepted is the one that lacks one or more of the following: access to improved sanitation, access to improved water, access to security of tenure, the durability of housing, so the materials, and also the access to sufficient living space, which help us to measure overcrowding. So if you live in an overcrowded dilapidated housing where you have no security of detainer. And if you have at least one of these attributes missing in your housing situation, you are measured as a slum dweller. Now, in Latin America, it generated these kind of cities, the cities that have, the cities that don't have, next to each other, massive informal urbanization in different kinds, in different lands, that is, in principle, should not be occupied because our land subject to landslides or heavy flooding, such as this one. So in Africa, also the same phenomenon where you can see quite the absence of public space, informally occupied land that generates massive areas of informal housing with severe, let's say, absence of basic infrastructure such as sanitation and water. But also in Asia, where you are located, some of these photos you probably know from Mumbai, where you have situations with some claim that you have the biggest slum in Asia, Dharav. So where you see situations like that. But also in Asia, we are observing that whenever there is a climate-related event, the informal areas are the first one that are unfortunately hit. So the poor is the one who is mostly hit very badly by events because they are usually occupying land that in principle should not, but is the only land available if they want to live in the city. But also in Europe and USA, the phenomenon is equivalent. So the global affordability crisis is not only a developing country, but it's a global phenomenon. More and more we see in Europe and in the United States, people not being able to afford to live or to buy a housing in the city where they live, and they are pushed to informal areas and homeless settlements in public areas. And today, actually after the pandemics, UN Habitat is revising the data, which was before the pandemics. 1 out of 4 people living in urban areas lives in slums. So this is the situation where we have, and it's a shame for humanity. And we see more and more people resorting to these areas, which have its own economy. It contributes to the city, but it compels people to face very hardship and what UN Habitat called the urban penalty, because the conditions in which people are living in these areas are penalizing their ability to contribute and benefit to the maximum to their families and the economy in the cities where they are living. Now, what do we do, and what have we done, and what have we learned from the experience worldwide? So let's make a retrospective. So if we look in the 60s and 70s, the approach was really repression, slum clearance and slum eradication, resettling people to public housing. This didn't provide good solutions, and the problem remained and gained scale. Then we start talking about in situ improvement policies through settlement upgrading projects, but very much concise to settlements and concise to individual slums. Then in the 90s, we start speaking about integration strategies and citywide slum upgrading approaches, not talking anymore about individual projects, but citywide approach to include and integrate these areas into the city through infrastructure, through connectivity in terms of streets and urban planning. So interventions on a large scale and looking at the city as a whole. And in a certain moment in time, in this century, we start talking about the social inclusion and livelihood improvement approach. So that combination between socioeconomic development because people needed a job, and combining the approach of infrastructure improvement with more looking at the livelihood of people. So what are the policy doctrines? So the 70s, slum clearance, which you have the 2 R's and 2 E's, repression, resettlement, eradication, eviction, connected with land acquisition, land banking, conventional housing projects. So in India, you had that in a certain moment in time. In Delhi, you had slum clearance programs, if I'm not correct, also in Mumbai. And people realized that this was not helping solving the problem. Then we came with the integration to the housing policies. So the slum problems were not on a large scale program, but projects which were connected to housing policies. So a lot of effort on land tenure regularization, sites and service, creating mechanisms of finance, and creating integrated projects. So we're not yet talking about programs, but in the 90s, we had the citywide policies with a program approach, looking at the local government responsibilities and looking at the urban productivity measures that would be gained by the city if these slum areas could be integrated into the whole urban fabric of cities. So we had there the combined approaches with the physical layout, restructuring, with legalization of land tenure, and infrastructure improvement programs. So the big things that happened then was moving from projects to program. And I think that was a very important change, because then we start dealing in a programmatic manner and creating funding mechanisms, management systems, understanding the problem at the city scale. So creating long-term perspective for these areas to be integrated into the city economy and the urban fabric of cities. Now, looking from the evolution of housing policies, it's very interesting because the beginning, the public housing policies as a response to Islam were based on a full-fledged public housing scheme. So ready-made housing located on cheap land, usually located on the fringe of cities. Then didn't work, so let's decrease the standard, create services with minimal housing units, so the core housing units with the sites and service schemes. So decreasing the standard in order to decrease the cost and trying to resolve the affordability and the housing cost variable. Didn't work, so we went to sites and service, so taking away the labor force and the construction costs from the equation, and assuming that people would move with their, let's say, labor force, mobilize their own resources with the state supporting finance of building materials, and people would then improve their housing conditions by self-help housing or mutual aid housing program. That didn't help to go to scale, so we start moving to city-wide and nationwide slum upgrading programs as part of these transformational housing policies. So taking away labor, taking away construction costs and land, because the land was occupied, and coming with the urban planning and infrastructure improvement. And in some cities, in Indonesia and in Brazil, for example, it was the implementation of sites without services. So programs where people were allowed to settle in a layout on the ground, but no infrastructure, but public stand pipes, septic tank solutions, so that gradually these settlements could be urbanized and infrastructure could be provided on individual plots. Well, these are the, let's say, the way we're moving, and looking at the models of, let's say, settlement interventions. So the clearance and relocation model, where we saw, for example, the displacement and resettlement of residents elsewhere. So here it was really like a radical solution of taking people away from their place of living. So the urban redevelopment model, which was implemented in a few places, such as Addis Ababa and Mumbai, which implied a relocation and possible return of residents to original site. And in Bangkok, for example, the land sharing model was implemented so that people would move away of part of the land and would be, let's say, transferred to nearby newly built housing units. We also had the slum upgrading.
So, sorry, Claudio, to interrupt you. Are you sharing your screen?
Sorry?
Your screen stopped sharing. Are you?
Oh, my screen stopped sharing. Yes. Okay. Let's see. It's still sharing, but okay. Let me.
You can stop sharing, and then yeah, now you can see. Yeah.
Is it back?
Yes, back.
Okay. Yeah, good that you kept alerting. So I don't know if you've seen this slide, but we can see different models of intervention when we talk about the settlement. One that is the clearance model, which implies relocation of everyone living on the site. The urban redevelopment model that was implemented in Addis Ababa and Mumbai, which relocates people and allow return to the original site, or like in Bangkok with the slum clearance approach, where people were moved from part of the site and were relocated to nearby areas so that part of the site could be used for redeveloped by the owner or by the municipality in combination with the residents. And the slum upgrading and restructuring model, which implies partial relocation of the residents within urban planning, like in Rio, Medellin, Bissau, Lusaka. So many cases where the area-based plan implies that some people living on the pathways of roads and infrastructure, they need to have their housing unit demolished and relocated nearby or in a different plot located in the settlement. And the conventional slum upgrading or slum improvement model, where residents stay where they live, there is little or no change. So basically, I call it a romantic approach because it doesn't change the structural characteristic of the settlement. So if you have a settlement which is very well occupied in terms of patterns of public domain and private domain, so it's easy. But if you have a very, let's say, unplanned occupation that makes it difficult and costly to provide infrastructure, so the situation doesn't change much, except that people have more access to infrastructure, but structurally the settlement doesn't change that much. Now, the logic of slum upgradings has been designed on the basis that public investments in situ upgrading and in basic infrastructure, focusing on the public domain by the state, will generate private investment and the use of domestic savings of residents in housing improvement. So the state intervention is creating opportunities for people to invest and produce housing opportunities without the state needing to invest in new housing. So that's basically the logic of the slum upgrading interventions that we have seen throughout the history. Why? Because it generates a de facto security of land tenure, and in some cases it went further to create land titles of these areas, which takes quite a while to be achieved because of the procedures to have land regularization in terms of tenure and land titles. But the logic is the same, to provide security so that people feel secure to invest on their housing improvement in the plots where they are living. So if we look at the informal urbanization with a bigger lens, we can identify some variables that are fully under control of the residents of slums, which are the construction time, so the process of improving the housing from a shack to a well-built brick or concrete housing, or more, let's say, permanent materials. It takes time, so people have a control of that because it depends on their own availability. The labor force, so their own labor, or they mobilize construction gangs from their neighbors, and there is a lot of creativity in how to mobilize labor force for building their own housing, the access to building materials in different ways, different types of materials, incrementally built, incrementally accessed, the construction process, which is incremental. So the process can take years until the transformation from a poor housing shack type to a more permanent unit of permanent materials, providing good quality of housing environment, and seed finance. So people have proven that although they're poor, they're able to save, they're able to check to even generate saving schemes with groups. SDI has proven in Mumbai, in parts of Asia and Africa, that women, when they get together to put some their daily savings on a pool, they're able to really self-finance the access to land in many places in combination with policies of municipality. But there are variables that residents do depend on the state. Infrastructure, so the provision of infrastructure is costly, it connects to the rest of the city, so residents depend on the state of that. The service land, so plan the land and serve the land. The state is by national, local, or regional governments or state agencies. The legal security of the occupied land through the whole legal system that register land ownership and property registration depends on the state. And the finance, the whole access to loans, long-term credit depends on the state to create the policies so that public and private finance is available to slum residents. And the planning, the urban planning that defines the future of these areas. If we understand that very well, we are able to define and design policies which can be different. So focusing on these, let's say, the different elements. So if we look on one side is the people-centered policies and strategies to support autonomous local development process of residents. And on the other hand, vigorous policies with institutionalized multi-year programs that allows for this continuity and guaranteed financial resources. The future of slum upgrading and the impact of slum upgrading programs depends on these two elements, the continuity and the institutionalization that will allow the programs to have access to some source of guaranteed financial resources. Now, during my time in UN Habitat, I was involved in promoting what we call the twin track approach, which is basically connecting slum upgrading and slum prevention. How do you do that? By creating programs that tackles some of the important components of improvement strategies, the planning, the land, the housing, the infrastructure, opening the streets, and I'll explain to you later why is that, and housing and urban policies that tackles for new housing and existing housing, creating opportunities and housing options that are affordable to different types of income groups in the city by creating land supply at scale, housing finance at scale, regulatory reforms, planning for growth, so preparing cities to absorb the pressure on demographic pressure for land, infrastructure, employment, and so on, and robust investments in infrastructure. So on one hand, you improve, and on the other hand, you prevent and you prepare cities to absorb this growth in a planned manner. So one single policy. So the twin approach is this, not that you only do improvement or you only do the supply side. You need to deal with the existing stock of slum, improve where it's possible, structure where it is. If you need to relocate, then relocate within a respect for human rights, a respect of the rights of people, and include them in this twin track approach of policies. Now, what do we learn from experience to come to the end of the presentation? It has a lot of similarities among the different experience, but also different impacts. Now, I will look only in 3 cases. So one is the Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, second largest city, was led by the municipality. The municipality got a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank and made a co-finance scheme. It stimulated private sector participation and went to a very citywide scale. It was oriented to public space and attracting resources to resolve the public domain, but allowing the residents to use their own resources to improve their housing. There was a very serious problem of drug trafficking in these areas, so the program was also designed to indirectly counterbalance the control of these drug lords into the settlement. The UN Habitat was a strategy which was more normative, was focusing and promoting citywide spatial integration, and promoting the idea that you need to have an area-based plan to implement and create a street network to reconnect these areas to the rest of the city. In Addis was a government-led, focused very much on redevelopment and relocation with some levels of compensation to residents. Now, why do we present this case of Rio de Janeiro? One, because we have never seen the scale, so citywide, multiple interventions at the same time, the amount of resources. So the municipality saved 1 year of its budget to start the program, and it's generating the first phase of the program, $385 million. So you can imagine the amount of resources in one city. 3, the innovations in the institutional and organization and management to allow the municipality to execute such a large-scale program. And it became a flagship of the Inter-American Development Bank, which was the co-financer, who started promoting the model in most Latin American countries. What was the first step? Map the situation. So the settlement profiles, socioeconomic, but also physical layout, digital maps of these areas, both the favelas, which are the slums in red, or the illegal land subdivisions in yellow. These are illegal land subdivisions, so land, I would call it, land traffickers who get hold of the land and start subdividing the land and selling to people illegally. So this is a phenomenon in Latin America, which is coming to many places in Africa and Asia as well. So these are the types of settlements. So a lot of them were situated on a hill. These are the components: the sewage, a square, so providing public space, legislation to define what is public, what is private, setbacks, accessibility, so street networks, but also paths for pedestrians, sports facility, new housing for people that need to be relocated, and the identification of streets, so street addresses. Now, something's happening here. Okay, so if you look at the components, very much the streets are very strong elements in the Rio de Janeiro experience. So streets is very much central in the strategy. So the urban layout, the urban plan of the settlement, defining what is public. In this case, people were living on stilt on the water, so they needed to be relocated. So a road was designed with a bike route and a public space, and people were transferred to a public housing project situated inside the settlement. So it was a trade-off between poor housing and better housing, and a relocation and compensation scheme was paid, and people could be chosen to be relocated immediately before the housing unit was built and be provided what was called the social rent. So they could rent for a period of time, paid by the municipality, an area until the housing unit was ready for them. And an important element in the plan was the street network to reconnect these areas to the rest of the city, and public space and sport facilities. This was a very common approach in all the favelas where the program was intervening. Street addressing was important. Why? Because it was a demand of all the residents association of the slum areas, favelas, because once you have let's say a public recognition of the street, you enter into the address map of the city and you are able to receive your mail into your address. Because before the intervention of the plans of the program, people were receiving their mail into the residents association address, and they were calling residents to go there and get their mail and their communication. So address in this respect was a recognition of citizenship for which people could provide in the shops around the area, that they could they had an address where they could pay provisory let's say property tax. The municipality accepted people to have a provisory property tax, of which they could use as a recognition of their address and get credit in the shops to buy television, to buy a refrigerator, and different things that people could buy on an installment basis because they had an address to prove where they live. This was very important. So the improvement of the street and the recognition of the address, which people could get even a telephone number, a telephone line. Now, how was the program executed? I mentioned the innovation in management and institutional organization. So the mayor decided on, okay, this is a diagrammatic view of the municipality. You have the mayor and the vice mayor and the different municipal departments, which are called secretariats. The project management or the program management create an horizontal coordination between the different secretariats or departments, and created a mechanism for implementation of the program. So the municipality, through the mayor, allocated the budget, and he developed the policy, and the housing department was in charge of developing the program. And he made a public tendering for the private firms, architectural office, to bid for implementing the methodology and the slum upgrading project in the different settlements. Once the project was implemented, he went for public tendering, and the building contractors bid to implement the program. It was an obligation to have community participation. So the leadership, meetings, consultations had to take place during the design phase, but also during the implementation phase. So this is how it was worked. So the public tendering to develop the methodologies, 50 proposals were presented by the private firms. The municipality hired the best 12 to start the program, and then they start working out the plan and involving the community. Once this was ready, so there was a project manager assigned to this particular project from the municipality, from the housing department, and it was in charge of making the liaison with the community and making sure that the plan fit into the standards and requirements of the municipality. And once this was ready, it went for bidding, and the building contractors then bid based on price and competence, and were assigned to implement the program. So they executed the projects, and they were recommended to hire people from the community to be part of the labor force. So it was very interesting in that respect, but there were a lot of problems with violence, with drug trafficking, intimidation. So it was a very challenging situation for the contractors, but also for the project managers to operate in these areas, because the programs were, the interventions in the settlements were making the drug trafficking very easily accessible by the police. It's not only the ambulance and the taxis that could enter, but also the police, and that creates quite a big conflict during the implementation. And also, they realized that they were not capable to go to that scale when the Inter-American Bank came into the equation. Why? the bank was requesting to, let's say, having the kinds of reports and financial reports that the municipality was not prepared to. So they had to hire financial management consulting firm to help, two of them, in order to help with the reports, with the different settlements and the different interventions in order to get the finance in place so that they could pay the building contractors. So the financial operation, it went like tenfold for the municipality, so they were not prepared to do that. So that was a lesson, because even a municipality that was very well qualified was not able to go to that scale without external support to support them in managing and financially managing the program of that scale. These are some of the results. So, and it became really a flagship program that inspired many other cities in Brazil, but also many other cities in Latin America. So here is the UN Habitat approach, which is called Street-led Slum Upgrading. Provides an approach or recommends an approach which is based on the area-based plan, so the urban layout plan for the settlement, that allows for the optimal use of the resources and propels what we call the integration, socio-economic, juridical, and physical integration of slum. So a lot of publications were done about that. They are available online, so you can download. There are actually 3 publications: the strategy, Street as a tool for urban transformation, the practical guide to design the program, and a training module that was designed after that. Now, it follows this logic: policy formulation, setting up a task force, defining the eligibility criteria. That is very important, because you need to have a selection criteria that defines which slums are going to be prioritized. You do the mapping, the enumeration, the cadastre, so you know the settlement's profile very well. You do a lot of community consultations, so you involve the residents. Then you do the project design. You can do in many forms. You can do participatory, in-house by the municipality, but you can also do public tendering and create some mechanism of participation of the community. And then you do the planning, prepare the planning for implementation, and then you do implementation, and you learn from it, and you keep doing what is called the program design approach. So this is basically the cycle that we see in successful, let's say, slum upgrading programs. So the street, in this respect, is very important because it comes as part of the, let's say, implementation of the plan. So you can see very easily, the 3 phases: the policy, the project, and the execution. There are mechanisms important to take into account when you're working with the municipal government, for example. You need to have a very good technical project that allows a good social mobilization, but also a good standard of design and planning that allows for a good execution on the field. Now, the approaches phase, so identifying the main streets that connects these areas to the rest of the city, and incrementally you start implementing these areas into a area-based plan, but you only implement the main roads, main streets, because you don't have all the resources available to do so. But gradually you start implementing as resources become available, and you start implementing the full plan that transform these areas into neighborhoods that are connected to the city, that gradually start improving its housing situation through slum improvement, but also housing improvements carried out by the residents themselves. So this is the approach. And finally, the approach which perhaps you are somehow familiar, which is the slum redevelopment, as they tried out in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, the capital. So it is what they call the inner city slum redevelopment approach. So the mapping of the informal areas in blue and the condominium housing that were implemented as part of the national housing policy. Then these are the kind of condominium housing, so multi-family housing with small flats, which people bid in a kind of a lottery to be able to be eligible to these areas. The city has a network which has main roads which are well planned, but between these roads, many informal areas that develop informally and quite compact and quite unplanned. Now, this is the area, how it was developed afterwards here in the center, which I will show you here. So this is a location in Addis. This is how the situation was before. So what are the key problems? So I have a, let me see if I have here the map. Yeah, I have the map here that will show you very well. So I have a problem here with something on my screen. Okay, so where are the key problems? Poor quality of life in the neighborhoods, poor infrastructure provision, so there was a shortage, a housing stock which was dilapidated, more than 40 years without repair, a lot of housing lacking kitchen and toilets, overcrowded occupation, no sewage network, an unplanned urban fabric with poor accessibility and narrow accesses, unemployment, and diverse income groups living in the area for a long period. Now, as you can see in terms of timeline, it took 1.5 years since the beginning of the project, of the process, to start the demolition, because the approach of redevelopment implied the demolition, as I will show you. And the redevelopment started immediately after the demolition and clearance of the area. Now, the development plan was part of this effort of the government then to create local development plans to these informal areas. So it was an integrated plan looking at physical, socioeconomic, and environmental issues through the acquisition of urban land, so that the public purpose was the idea. So you turn the area into a public interest with the objective of improving the housing conditions for the poor, facilitating access to basic infrastructure, utilities, and supporting local economic development. So that was the idea of the integrated local development plan. So it was a poor integrated plan based on land acquisition, provision of housing, infrastructure improvement or provision, and the local economic development. So these were the 5 elements, and the environmental improvement. So this is the plan of this area, Lindeta, and this is the area-based plan. And here you see the type of housing intervention already with the slum areas demolished. So here is 2009, how the area was on your left, and here is 2016, how the area became. As you see, the approach was full redevelopment, giving the opportunity for people to remain in the area if they wanted to. And I'll explain you how they did. So this is how the area was, and here's how the area became. So it's a radical transformation or a redevelopment approach. If you remember my first slides on the different models of intervention, here is, I gave you an example. The one is the citywide slum upgrading with partial relocations of the residents. And here is a redevelopment approach where you have a full relocation of residents with the opportunity given to residents to return to the original area. So it's a total redevelopment and a total redevelopment plan. Participants were very much willing to participate in the process. As you can see on research, being carried out in the area. There was a very intense consultation because it was a radical change. So there were people that were private owners in this area, so they owned the housing that existed in this area, although land was public owned, because in the context of Ethiopia, land is public ownership, and they adopt the land lease as a land policy. And then residents sometimes rebuked the proposals because they didn't know exactly what was going to happen. There was not sufficient information. So the consultations were quite intense in that respect. So here is a consultation with the resident to choose to be transferred to other public areas in the city, and the consultation with the tenants, because there were a lot of tenants living in the informal areas as well. So the first consultation gave certain idea where participants were looking at what they wanted to do with the public housing. In the beginning, they were very hostile to the idea of relocation. Then consultations started to take place. The leadership of the program started coming, and the three options were given to tenants. So to buy the condominium housing units built by the government in other parts of the city with a mortgage and by paying 20% down payment. Two, to buy the condominium housing units to be constructed on the site with similar buying arrangement as above, being temporarily sheltered in housing units that the government offered during the reconstruction period. And here to be relocated to other public housing units located elsewhere if they cannot afford to buy the condominium housing. So also the tenants were giving different options. So to buy units by the government in other parts of the city with a 20 years mortgage, to buy condominium housing units to be constructed on the site with similar arrangements for the owners, and to be relocated to other public housing units. So in this respect, becoming a tenant elsewhere. So these are the kind of discussions. So the highest leadership of the city came to discuss, so that to give the confidence that people's rights to housing were going to be respected. And then the private homeowners were also consulted, and there were in three options given to them: to take cash and land compensation, to get cash and land compensation on the site or elsewhere in the city, the number one, or to get cash compensation and buy condominium housing unit on the site or elsewhere in a builder site. So in all cases, 1 year house rent was paid to residents considering the construction period. And residents demand no relocation. So on-site redevelopment claim that the area is their source of livelihood and their identity. So they wanted to remain on the site. So there are things you need to consider when you opt for the redevelopment approach, because a lot of people earn their income and their survival strategy in the urban economy in the areas or surrounding the areas where they live. So homeowners, as I said, take cash and in all years, etc. So I already have shown you that. So these are the type of consultation to give a flavor that the process, despite of being so radical in terms of redevelopment and assuming the relocation of people, it was intensely, let's say, with intense consultation, participation. And of course, we should learn more and do more research to see what is the, let's say, the level of quality and improvement and this level of satisfaction that people have by living in a newly built housing in this area. I think these are the kind of research we need to do, and in order to really, let's say, understand whether the impact of our policies is actually generating what the policy was done. So there was a lot of youth activism in the area. So there was a particular attention given to the youth, and also issues of cash, employment, and people claiming that they wanted to be housed separately. So there were a lot of issues in when you start dealing with consultations with private homeowners that articulate very well what they want to have, and they are in a good negotiation position with the government. So they're able, in comparison to the tenants, they're able to gain more in the negotiation than tenants. That's obviously, but it all depends on how the community is organized. So this is the outcome some years later, where you see the trees are there, the housing are more consolidated, and the public areas are not very well maintained in terms of the public area, but you see the greenery coming and people taking control of their settlement, and you see the shops appearing on the ground floor, etc. So, final conclusions. It is important that we do the planning for both social and spatial integration. So it's not only about doing the physical plan, but how to create conditions that people actually socially integrate them in the new area or in the city where they are located. So it's physical, social, but also the legal part. The housing improvement is very interesting when you combine that with the public utilities improvement. So the approach in Rio, as you see very often in slum upgrading, is to focus on the public domain. So public infrastructure, streets, drainage, water, sewage, public lighting, power lines, etc., while leaving the housing improvement to residents and providing, in the case of Rio, providing a policy to support that. So support the housing improvement, providing technical assistance so that people can have technical support to transform their housing unit. The governance and citywide interventions, so the governance of the program, but also the governance of the city is important in order to go to scale that you saw in Rio. The scale is important. If we do not manage to go to scale, you create small interventions in areas that creates a value added, and the market makes an incredible pressure on those slum improved, and their housing costs or housing prices improve, accessibility improve, and people start selling out, and you see a displacement of the original residents by those who have higher income and have the ability to pay what slum dwellers are, or the dwellers of the slum that is improved are asking for. Finance is important. So mechanisms of finance of the program, but also mechanisms of finance of house improvement to enable individual residents and households to access small credits so that they can transform their housing gradually and incrementally according to their ability to pay. The institutional capacity and technical capabilities, I think the case of Rio shows that quite clearly. Even when you have a well-established and a capable municipality, one of the best equipped cities in Brazil in that respect, you also need to support the capacity of the municipality if it goes to scale that it went to scale. Land, fundamental. If we do not resolve the question of land, both in Ethiopia, both in the Rio case, you have to have a policy towards the land. How do you do that? Do you regularize the land? Do you provide a right to use? Do you provide the lease, which means the right to lease for a number of years? Or how do you give security of tenure? Because the land regularization process is lengthy, is cumbersome. The land registry and property registry, notary offices, they make it very difficult to transform informal land occupation into formal land title deeds. So it's a lengthy and time-consuming process one needs to consider. And finally, building communities. creating mechanisms that communities can thrive, their leadership can thrive, social cohesion can be achieved, and improved neighborhoods incrementally can transform the living areas of people that they can feel they belong to the city where they live. So these are the cases that I showed to you, and that's it. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, it was a great presentation, very informative, and I'm sure the students of Hire College enjoyed, and also our viewers on Facebook, as this was Facebook Live. So I'll hand it over to Sonali, who is the group lead, project lead coordinator from the college, and she has some questions from you. So she will just.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
All right. So, sir, very first, myself, architect Sonali Palkar. I'm teaching in Hire College of Architecture. Thank you so much. That whole presentation was indeed very informative. So thank you so much once again. Question from our side. Very first, I would like to ask you that though you have already mentioned about twin track approach, can you please elaborate on how to deal with this twin track approach, which can focus on slum prevention by improving the supply and also affordability of new housing to reduce the growth of new slums? So can you please elaborate on that twin track approach a bit?
Okay. Do you want me to respond right now?
Yeah. So,
okay. Oh, no, I thought you had other questions. Now, that's a very good question, actually. Fundamentally, the argument is that if we only provide a program that supply different housing options in scale for different income groups and different segments of the housing market, you're solving one part of the housing demand. But if you do not include a policy that approach the stock of slum that already exists, and that you understand the conditions of these large areas and small areas in the city, you will create a pressure on the new housing stock of new housing opportunities that you create, because you marginalize areas and you do not include those areas into the policy. So the twin track approach brings the two solutions in one go. Why? Because by improving the slums and providing diverse housing opportunities, in the slums you are creating opportunities for new housing without building new houses and without investing in housing, but basically investing in urban planning, street connectivity, infrastructure, and promoting people to improve their house improvements and expanding, including their properties and transforming from informal to formal. So you bring to, if you wish to look from the urban economics point of view, you bring an enormous stock of housing to the housing market. And if you bring the solutions for new housing, and I'll come to the details of that, you create scaling supply. When you create scaling supply, the tendency will be that you will have housing prices decreasing and affordability becoming an issue, not an issue anymore, because people start having options that they're able to pay according to their income, depending on the location that these housing options are offered. Now, that requires what? Requires very intelligent housing policies that will look with legal and planning instruments to make sure that land that is vacant in the inner city and in the urbanized area of the city can be used for social housing or middle income housing, because we cannot make differentiations when we talk about policies in housing. We need to supply the different options to different income segments so that you don't put pressure on the low income housing that is supplied by those who have higher income. So you provide large opportunity. And how do you do that? many Latin American cities have legal instruments to intervene on the private domain of cities by master planning and by legal instruments that determine that those lands that are served by infrastructure in the urban core can only be used for social housing. Now, in other parts of Asia, I know by experience that the landowners have the upper hand. Municipalities don't dare to challenge and don't have the instrument to intervene in the private domain of land, because private land ownership is almost like in the US, is sacred. You cannot touch. Now, in Latin American cities, you see legal instruments provide that cities are providing instruments to densify the areas and providing more opportunities for housing in vacant land that is there just for speculation. Now, you also have land in the fringe that has infrastructure, but is kept empty, and you can do that with a policy integrated with the urban plan. Now, I'm being very concise in this part of the creating new housing because it requires a combination of planning, legal development, and policy decision all together, because many mayors are not willing to take up the fight with the landowners in their cities, because they are powerful groups that are politically associated with the power that remains, and they are not able to, let's say, intervene in the sense of creating a city that is accessible for all.
Sonali madam, we cannot hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm muted.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir, now?
I can hear you.
So my next question to you is, because our students, we are already working on 2 case studies. So we would like to know that while planning or designing for slum dwellers, how can we meet both physical and social aspect at very initial stage while planning and designing to improvise slum dwellers' quality of life, because they are identifying solution at the same time when they are working on these 2 case studies. So can you please enlighten us on the same?
Yes. Another good question. In the strategy of human habitat, we speak about the area-based plan. And we see that the area-based plan, which is an urban planning and design product, if you wish to call it like that, of the settlement, is a way to define what is public, what is private, where is the best and optimal way to connect the street network of the city, where infrastructure will be laid down, where the power lines, where the drainage systems will go, and where streets will be paved incrementally to allow accessibility to this area. So that approach will imply that, unfortunately, when you come with the plan and the area-based plan, these areas are already occupied. And some of them, like in Rio, they are almost 100 years occupied. So how do you do that? How do you intervene positively in this environment? When I say environment, the urban environment, without touching, for example, there are 3 buildings that are on the way of the best solution for the street to connect with the other side of the settlement. What do? You have to involve the residents. You have to convince them that the best way is to demolish these areas, find a location nearby that they will improve their situation, create a compensation that they feel that their investments, their time, their energy that they have put on that place is properly compensated, and that they will not become worse off in the new situation. But the residents and the settlement will improve dramatically, because the area-based plan will be fully implemented, because the road will connect with the other side of the settlement. I'm giving you, let's say, a situation where it's very common in many areas, where if you do the urban plan and design, there will be some buildings that are on the way. And what do you do with that? You need to involve the residents. You need to convince them. You need to convince that the entire settlement will improve because you will have an optimal connectivity with the city. Their housing will be improved. Their housing asset in terms of price will be improved. They will be accessed by public transport in a certain moment in time because they're fully connected to the rest of the city. So that is how the urban plan and design comes into the equation. You cannot do slum upgrading without, in my view, efficiently, without having a plan, and what I call the area-based plan.
Right, thank you, sir. My last question to you is, what needed to be done to reduce the effect of slum rehabilitation on residential mobility in order to overcome poverty recycling? Now, here just I want to elaborate on poverty recycling for my students as well. So, poverty recycling majorly where poor slum dwellers moving back to the slum because they aren't able to maintain new living conditions. So, how slum rehabilitation schemes can overcome this poverty recycling? Can you please elaborate on this as well?
Yeah, that's a question that take us to the I would call it the political economy of slums. I believe that people have not the choice that are made to people who have a certain condition in the city is given by the social political process, and that's why they end up in places where they live without necessarily being the place that they would like to live or they chose to live, but it's sometimes the only choice they have. So there is a condition of exclusion, there is a condition of inequality that has roots in the way our societies are developing. How can we tackle this? Through a slum improvement intervention. This is, can we change the social political situation of these people by improving their living conditions through slum upgrading? We can contribute to improvement by creating dignity to their living area. Dignity in the sense that they would have access to water, to electricity. They will live in an area that is progressively being urbanized, which incrementally will be looking like the neighboring formal area next door. They will have benefits. They will have some rights recognized, and they can claim more of their rights by being in a place that is now public recognized as a neighborhood in transition from slum to a formal area. And this can propel their self-esteem and their position in society that can help them to organize themselves and claim their political, social, and economic rights in the country where they live, in the city where they live. Obviously, that this is not automatic, but once you have a slum that is improved and upgraded, people start feeling that they're treated with dignity. They're no longer living in the periphery or in the subhuman conditions, that they're now having better living conditions of which they can start dreaming for even better life and better living conditions. So it's a transformational process that obviously the NGOs, the social organizations will have to work so people can have more access to education, to training, improve their skills, contribute better. Because, in Mumbai, where you are, you go in Dharavi, you see an enormous economy of this place, providing goods for the city, labor for the city, but also creating problems for the residents because the area has problems in different scale of accessibility, of public space, of housing conditions, of sanitation, so on and so on, and that impacts the quality of life. So intervening in Dharavi and giving more dignity and connectivity to the rest of the city, I'm sure on the long term would transform the life of those inhabitants. and giving opportunities for this area to transform. Obviously, that you can't do that scale in one go. So you have to do incrementally with planning, with intervention, with investment, infrastructure, participation, economic development, social support, and so on and so on.
That's true, sir. Thank you so much. That's all from my side. I would request Aditya sir to take over the conversation ahead. Thank you so much once again, sir.
Thanks a lot, Sonali. Your questions were really to the point, and the answers that Claudio gave were really enlightening. More than that, what Claudio said in the whole session is something that we have been looking for since a long time, and the governments need to start working on them already. Claudio, I've been researching on Zero Slum since 4 years now. Like I started this 4 years back. I'll ask you the holy grail of the question, right? This is the biggest question that I face from all the experts and all the ones who are critical about zero slums or slum redevelopment is the carbon footprint. Now, as per our research, if proper housing is provided to all the slums that are there in the city or in the world, the consumption of resources would be multiplied by 3 times. Like they'll be consuming 3 times the resources. Number one is getting those resources on board. Secondly, the carbon footprint that would be left because of that consumption. How do cities or the governments deal with that?
Okay, that's another complex question, but I'll try to give you a straight answer. Look, the data that we looked in the City Prosperity Index of UN Habitat, and looking particularly with the Street Connectivity Index and the percentage of land allocated to public space in cities, show that the cities that have a high connectivity index and public space accessible to its inhabitants produce highest rate of prosperity for all its inhabitants. In other words, cities that have a lot of informal settlements and is based on informal urbanization are penalized twice, penalizing the inhabitants that live in these areas and penalizing the city by not being able to provide prosperity at the level that it could provide if it had a pattern of street planned and urban plan, because large areas of these cities are informally developed. So the slum has this double coin. It's a coin of 2 sides. The side that is an economy in itself, that people survive there and provides an economic hub for the city, but at the same time is a place where people are subject to very hardship and very hard conditions that affect their life, their kids, their health, and so on and so on. So if governments recognize and have the data and have the political will and the guts to really work with the settlements and intervene on a program base, as I mentioned, the future will be much better off for the entire city and the city economy. We know that. And the World Bank made a story, 2 studies in African cities, and showed the same, that planning matters. And because cities are growing informally and the government is not taking account to these informal agglomerations that is being created, it is penalizing the economy, because foreign direct investment are avoiding the cities because the access to goods, services, and labor is compromised by the configuration of the cities. So this is how I would call it. Is not only a political issue or a social issue, it's an economic future for the city as well. Logically, that we need to look at the conditions of human beings, because they are there and they have the right for a decent living. India, Brazil, Holland, all the countries signed for the Declaration of Human Rights, which says that people have the right for a decent standard of living, of which housing is part of it. Okay.
Completely agree with you, Claudio. Really appreciate you taking out so much of your time, precious time, and giving us all the insights. We'll close the question answer session now, and I'll invite Pushparaj. He's been a pillar for us for 0Slums, and I'll invite Pushparaj to give you a vote of thanks and take some last words from you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It has been an honor for me to be speaking to such a large group, and I wish you all success. I think Mumbai March has a great, I think it's a great initiative, and I wish you success in your endeavors. Thank you.
Wow, that has been some informative session followed by the Q&A. I would just say that was really insightful. Thank you, Claudio. We very well know, like you are completely like, your schedule is jam-packed in this month, right? Where you have to travel around the Europe, right? For your assignments. So thank you so much for taking out the slot for us and for imparting the invaluable input about the settlement sector as well as the housing policy. We also know, like you very much like to interact with the students around the globe, and the students of Dr. Baliram Hire College of Architecture here today are really blessed to hear it from you. And I'm sure there are some key takeaways for them from this session. I also thank the management, principal, and professors of Dr. Baliram Hire College of Architecture for co-hosting this event and joining us in our vision and mission to see Mumbai slum-free. Equally thankful to the students of Dr. Hire College for being the workforce in our mission. We have interacted with them for the last 2 months, and we have seen the way they are putting up the enthusiasm, the dedication. They have a bright future and they will do well in their line of profession. For the Mumbai March team, volunteers, supporters who have been watching us every live today, I guess the information what Claudio has put has been productive and very much informative. Thank you for joining us. In the end, I will just say, we are in the path of giving Mumbai slum-free, which seems difficult, but not unachievable. With your tremendous support, positive attitude, and sheer dedication, we'll thread this path for our mission to see Mumbai, our Mumbai, a city that never sleeps, slum-free. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will connect you in future for more such interactive sessions. Thank you. Bye-bye.